Mr Salmond, the SNP met the Prime Minister Theresa May yesterday in Cardiff. What was achieved by that? Are you confident that Scotland will have a voice in these Brexit negotiations?
No, we're not. And despite, of course, Theresa May's own assurance just a week after she became Prime Minister, when she said she wanted to seek an agreed UK position with the devolved administrations, we've seen precious little sign of that. All we've had is effective diktats from Theresa May about the direction she wants to go and precious little listening. And we've still to get a government response to the very considered paper, almost a white paper, put out by the Scottish Government offering a compromise position, whereas if Theresa May is determined to drag the UK out of the single market, Scotland could retain that membership. We still to have a UK government response to what is a very reasonable proposition.
So you're complaining that the white paper lacks detail. However, if you vote against this bill, in effect, you are voting against the will of the British people.
Well, we don't have a white paper. The government have promised a white paper, but they say quite ludicrously the white paper seems to be going to be after the vote in the Commons. What use is that? I mean, if I can take you back to the Scottish referendum campaign, I, as First Minister, published a 670-word white paper explaining what we wanted to do, and that was before the referendum vote. Now this government is saying they're going to publish a white paper after everything is done and dusted. That's quite unacceptable, and it's one of the reasons, of course, why the government should not get a second reading for this bill.
And what has been made quite clear is that the UK will leave the single market, potentially the customs union as well. Where would that leave Scotland?
Well, it leaves the UK in a position of substantial weakness. It will cost 80,000 Scottish jobs. It will harm investment and economic prospects, which is why we want to stay within the single market. And we're already seeing the political repercussions of that disastrous policy. I mean, the reason that Theresa May has abased herself before President Trump is she's in a position of dramatic weakness by abandoning the world's biggest single market. She's fawning over President Trump to get a trade deal, resulting in the whole farrago of nonsense that we're seeing at the present moment, the potential embarrassment of Her Majesty the Queen and the debasing of this country's international reputation by aligning herself so quickly and so unnecessarily with President Trump. That has come about because of the weak position that the Prime Minister has placed herself in.
How could Scotland stay part of the single market?
Well, for example, there is in Europe at the present moment the countries of Liechtenstein and Switzerland, who are in a currency union, a monetary union and a passport union with each other. But Liechtenstein's within the European Economic Area, the single marketplace, and Switzerland is not. There is a working example of how you can do it. So when people tell us, oh, these things are impossible, we just say, look, it's already being done in Europe. What you need is the political will and the political imagination to make it happen. Thus far, Theresa May is lacking in both.
So if you wanted to stay part of the single market, you would effectively have to leave the UK. So what does Scotland value more, the UK or the EU?
No, I'm sorry, I've just given you a working example in Europe at the present moment, right, where Liechtenstein is in a currency union, a monetary union, a passport union with Switzerland, but Liechtenstein's within the single marketplace and Switzerland isn't. This can be done. You can have special arrangements. I mean, after all, we know there's been a... Would the EU want
to give Scotland a special arrangement, though? What would make Scotland special?
Well, OK, there's going to be a special deal for the car industry in Sunderland. We don't know what it is, but we know it's been done. There's going to be a special deal for Northern Ireland. There'll have to be. There's going to have to be a special deal for the Channel Islands, for Gibraltar. Now, if a special deal's good enough for the car industry in Sunderland, don't you think it's good enough for the nation of Scotland?
In terms of Scotland and independence, you've spoken about there being a second referendum. There's a Sunday Times poll, though, that says there's not really an appetite for that. Where does your confidence come from in terms of holding that second referendum? Well,
actually, the Sunday Times poll, admittedly not put in a prominent place in the reporting of it by the Sunday Times. That's just the way they are in Scotland. But actually what it said is that 27% of people wanted a referendum before the Brexit negotiations. Another 24% wanted one after the Brexit negotiations. That, to me, is 51% want a referendum within a reasonable time period. And, of course, the same poll also showed that support for independence is now at 46%, making it the 16th out of 17 polls since the European referendum showing independence support at a higher level than it was in September 2014. And remember, when I called the referendum resulting in the September 14 poll, independent support was at 28%. I don't think Nicola Sturgeon should have any compunction about calling one if she has to, if the compromise deal we've offered is turned down, when support for independence is at 46%.
OK, Mr Salmond, just before you go, I just want to talk to you, touched on it earlier, this state visit that's proposed for later this year for President Trump. When you were First Minister of Scotland, it took you several years to get an audience with the Queen and a state visit. Just want to get your thoughts on the fact that President Trump is essentially being fast-tracked by the Prime Minister.
Well, I actually had an audience with the Queen almost immediately on becoming First Minister. But, you know, the Queen is Queen of Scotland. She's Queen of Scots. That's what you'd expect. As Peter Ricketts, the former Permanent Secretary of the Foreign Office, has said, it's actually unprecedented to offer a fast-track state visit to a new American president. Any American president, even the great American presidents, weren't offered this honour. Therefore, you have to ask, why on earth did Theresa May put this country in a position of such embarrassment, potential embarrassment for Her Majesty the Queen? And the only answer is the reason that they were so anxious to fawn over Donald Trump was because of the position of weakness they have in exiting the single marketplace. That is a sorry state for this country to be placed in by the Prime Minister.
Do you think she should take the invitation back? Should she cancel the state visit?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think the reputation of this country is... In Scotland, we have an old saying, if you flee with a cause, you get shot with a cause. Right now, Theresa May has us fleeing with Donald Trump, and we shouldn't be in that position.
OK, Alex Salmond, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Sky News Sunrise this morning.